This is Shaping Opinion, a production of O'Brien Communications.
Lloyd, why should young people care who Napoleon Hill was?
I don't know if they have to care exactly who he was, but it's more about what he did and what he represented. For a long, long time, there's been different ways about thinking about yourself, thinking about the world, and so forth. And if you look at the self-help movement, a lot of that can be traced back to his work. And there were other contemporaries like Andrew Carnegie at the time who wrote a number of other books, and you know all of the self-help and motivational people throughout the generations. But what it really came down to, his big point was, we become what we think about. So if you change what's in your mind, just like if you change the food you eat, you become a different person. And so that's really how I set it up to them, that they've got a chance to start shaping and creating and building the future they want, not one that they think is given to them.
I'm Tim O'Brien. In this episode of the Shaping Opinion podcast, we're joined by Dr. Lloyd Corder. He's a veteran marketing strategist, a researcher, and a college professor. He's also the founder of research firm CoreComm Inc. in Pittsburgh. The premise of our podcast is simple. We talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Today we're on site at the Pittsburgh Business Show, and we'll talk with Lloyd about the legacy of the father of the motivation industry, Napoleon Hill. If you ever bought a self-help book, there's a chance that you read terms and concepts that originated with Napoleon Hill in the early 20th century. If you like to listen to podcasts, attend seminars, or join webinars about how to be more successful, you may not realize that some of the core ideas behind those lessons started with Napoleon Hill. According to the Napoleon Hill Foundation, Napoleon was born in 1883 in a one-room cabin on the Pound River in Wise County, Virginia. He began to write as a mountain reporter at the age of 13, working for small-town newspapers, and he went on to become one of the country's pioneering motivational authors. His most well-known book is called Think and Grow Rich, which is the all-time bestseller in its field. That book and his many other activities pursued a mission to perpetuate his philosophy of leadership, self-motivation, and individual achievement. Millions have read his books, listened to audio recordings, and watched videos that his foundation has produced over the years. Napoleon Hill passed away in November 1970 and has left a legacy and an operating model that nearly all other motivational speakers and authors have followed since. Dr. Lloyd Corder serves as a professor in the Communications School at the University of Pittsburgh and at the Business School at Carnegie Mellon University. He's incorporated some of Napoleon Hill's work into his own teaching and says that material is very popular among his own students.
Lloyd, what prompted you to incorporate Napoleon Hill's thinking into some of your own coursework when you teach at college campuses?
That's a great question, Tim. When I first started teaching over 30 years ago, when I was in graduate school, I would read the books that were supposed to be expert in the field, and naively you would say, well, that must be pretty good. Then I would start working or doing consulting projects and found that 95% of the stuff they were talking about had no real application or value. You really had to work hard to translate it into something useful. So I quickly decided that all of my courses, wherever they were, at whatever university, or even in the consulting work I do, are going to be about things that work. And so we're going to help people be more productive, more successful. And one of the things I found with so many students is they have a vague inkling of what success means, but they haven't figured out how to write goals and really get those crystal clear in their minds. They haven't figured out how to overcome procrastination, and there's all of these habits, or bad habits, if you will, that are keeping them from being even more successful. And so I'd always been a fan of Napoleon Hill, and I read many years ago his book, Think and Grow Rich, and so I just decided as things went along, maybe this would be a great thing to include in the courses and expose the students to it. And ironically, the students who show this stuff to their parents many of them who might own businesses or are successful that way, they come back and they say, this is great stuff. I'm glad you're learning it at a university, because I'm not aware of anybody else that's even bringing it into one lecture as we do.
Have you had any surprise reactions from students when they come back to you either right after the class or maybe even years later? Have you gotten any feedback on it?
Well, that's another great question. I'm very fortunate that a number of my students will tell me how they're doing. In fact, several of them have become great clients that we've started out with small projects and done, I don't know, in my business, hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars of work for their organizations. So that's, I suppose, on the high end. But I always get notes about students and what they're doing. And when you're doing it long enough, many of them now have kids and they're been very, very successful in their careers. So there are some surprise reactions. I give you one last example. I had a young man that just taught at a course called International Marketing, and I stuck a section on goal setting because, as you know, in the marketing field, having clear goals drives a whole communication plan. Well, he just got accepted into the Naval Academy. He's in one of their graduate programs. He's going to be a fighter pilot. All of these things going on, and I wrote him a letter of recommendation, and he told me after the course, he said the most valuable thing was the section on goal setting, because nobody took the time to show him how practically to write a goal, what's an action plan, how to put it together. And that's the stuff that Napoleon Hill talked about day and night that makes people successful, and I think it's still true today.
Well, he really broke it all down. Are there any certain takeaways, though, that your students come away with then before they leave your class? Are there any surprises that they have when you first hit them with one of those lessons or one of those rules?
I think probably one of the more common reactions is students go from feeling out of control, like their life is a big mess, they're maybe not driving it, to all of a sudden they start getting clear on what they want. They stop procrastinating, and many of them start accomplishing great things before a week or two after they even start thinking about this. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a young lady in one of my classes some years ago, and she said she wasn't sleeping well. She was tossing and turning. I said, what's going on? She says, well, I'm getting married soon, and I'm really nervous. I said, well, why don't you take the assignment here and plan out your wedding? The next week, she came in with a 17-page document in reverse chronological order by date of what she had to do when. And it was, I'm going to go pick the suits out on this day and order the flowers, and you know the rest. And I said, well, how do you feel and how are you sleeping? She says, I'm sleeping like a baby and I feel like I'm in control and I love my life better now that I got it out of my head and onto a sheet of paper. So that's a reaction.
So it's a process, obviously, that helps you accomplish your goals, even if they're not always financial or career-oriented. But that leads us actually to Napoleon Hill, because Napoleon Hill is considered the father of motivational thinking, or the father of modern motivational thinking, with some of his writings. And as you said, there are so many motivational speakers that are making millions of dollars each year, and they're basically repackaging what Napoleon Hill first created. So can you tell us who Napoleon Hill was and what he really had to say?
Well, a lot of people know him from his book Think and Grow Rich, but the history I know about him, he was a reporter, and he wasn't doing all that well, and he'd have financial troubles just like everybody else, and he'd struggle. The story goes, by good luck, he had a chance to interview Andrew Carnegie. And Carnegie went up to him and said, hey, how about I write you a letter of introduction and you go around and you interview the great business leaders of our time. These are the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and all of those, and find out what makes them successful. Because Carnegie says, I have a theory that the people that are in business and the entrepreneurs of our day are probably doing and thinking differently than the people that aren't so successful. He then went out, and this is what I love about him, because my company is a research company. He says he did over 2,000 interviews of other business people, and all of that resulted in 2 buckets. And he calls them 17 laws of success, which is all the stuff you should be doing, and 30 causes of failure. So he did what I call a gigantic content analysis, all the open-ended comments, put them into themes, and said, here's what it is. And so when you say the other motivational speakers, I think he found basically the truth in many circumstances, and they basically repackage that or reuse their own stories of those same principles that he uncovered.
Well, the one term that you said that he's most known for, and it's almost the core philosophy of Napoleon Hill, is we become what we think about. That's the cornerstone. What stems out of that concept?
That if you change what's going into your mind, like as I was saying before, just like if you change the food you eat, you start to become a different person. So if you wake up in the morning and you say, you know what, I was smart enough last night that I planned out my day and I know the 6 things I have to do, well, then there's less worrying. You're more into the actual doing of the work versus stressing yourself out. You also, you have other things like mastermind group concepts and all of these other principles that he came up with that basically say, you don't have to be the expert at everything. If you're good at articulating what you want and surrounding yourself with the right kinds of people and trying to help them, then they're going to help you. And so through all of that, you can get way more done than if you're just sort of sitting there waiting for life to come at you. And so I think if you look at any successful person, on some level, they're doing one or more of Napoleon Hill's principles regularly.
And there are so many principles, and he breaks it down numerically. So one of the first lists he came up with was Napoleon Hill's 17 Laws of Success. What are some of the key ones?
Well, there's some great ones on there. Some of the ones that I really like are, for example, the chief aim. That's what he called goal setting. He said in life, you should have like a purpose, and you should get out of bed and you should work that purpose. It doesn't mean you have to be totally committed to that forever. You can change your purpose, but having a purpose is a lot better than not having a purpose. There's other things too, like your attitude. We had concepts like applied faith. That, you know, if you look at any religion, what do they all say? That hey, you got to have some faith, believe that stuff that isn't here or might not be reality yet might become reality. We took that very practically in your day-to-day life, your business, that sort of thing. I really like that about him. He also talked about your environment. Some people, and this is interesting, a lot of my students, I get a lot of athletes in my University of Pittsburgh classes because they're on Monday nights, and that's the night the football team doesn't have practice. I can't tell you the number of young men I've met that are not only the first person in their family to go to college, in many cases they're the first person in their high school or their neighborhood to go to college. And what those guys come out of is an extremely disadvantaged situation. And they all have the same goals. They want to go to the NFL, and they want to buy their mom a new house. Those are always the two goals. But what's fascinating to me is that really brings home that sometimes your environment wasn't great. Maybe your parents were alcoholics growing up or whatever. And so he's saying you might have got dealt a bad hand. That doesn't mean you have to live that hand for the rest of your life. So that's what he talks about, changing your environment. There's also about effort. It's another big one. How much effort do you put into things? Or are you just kind of guessing? Do you get education? He has all topics around that. And the last one, big thing he talked about was discipline, which is, are you committed and consistent in what you're doing? So I know those are a lot of topics and a lot of flying around there, but on what level does that not sound like apple pie and motherhood? It's hard to disagree that any of that stuff would not make you more successful than without it.
What are some of the causes of failure? He had 30 causes of failure, so that's the flip side of this.
Well, there are some of them, things like, one of my favorite ones is getting something for nothing. If you were handed things or you really didn't work for something that was given to you easy, then it's easy to underestimate just how difficult it is to get something. I know probably any adult has struggled with ups and downs in terms of their weight, right? It's a lot easier to pack it on than it is to take it off, and you hit walls and so forth. And so if all of a sudden you could just wake up and you're 30 pounds lighter the next day, well, none of us would do anything. But sometimes it takes effort. So when you've actually earned it, you're a different person than if it just sort of happened to you. So those are some of them. Other ones are like the people you surround yourself, even in the environment there. Are you around negative people that are all constantly telling you can't do something, or that you're a loser, or that you're a terrible person or whatever? Even if it's sophisticated or if it's passive aggressive, those things can grate on you. So almost in every one of those areas I mentioned, there's the opposite side that can be a problem if you let it.
So obviously, using the environment, if you surround yourself with good people, positive, encouraging, and supportive people, you're more likely to succeed. If you surround yourself with more negative people, critical people, you're less likely to succeed.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about a cakewalk here. It's not that you don't want people to be tough on you. And I know when I hire people at my staff, I don't know why they tell me this. I don't feel I'm a mean guy. But one of my stars right now, she told me this the other day. She said, the first 2 months when I came to work for you, I went home and I bawled my eyes out every night. I said, what were you doing that for? She said, on how tough you were. I said, what are you talking about? She said, well, when I was in college, I was patted on the back and told how great I was, and I came up here and I look at my work then and I look at my work now, and I know I'm a different person, and I know I was nothing like I am now. So it's not about being not tough. It's still trying to be in a loving and caring environment. But if somebody is really just there to screw you over or to knock you down or to ruin your life or whatever, then get away from that. That's what he's saying.
Right. That's when you look at that, you're setting high expectations for someone so that they can set those same expectations for themselves. And as time goes by, you become less of a tough manager because they are doing it for you. They're managing themselves.
Right, and they start picking on me. Why aren't you doing something that hurts too?
And that's true, and you want that, don't you?
I do want that. But yeah, and that's what the students find out too, is that if you move to a level where, I always have it in 3 steps. We call it the improvement formula. There's the present, where you are right now today, and which is why in this whole course we have them assess. And we use a survey of Napoleon Hill's statements, and they get other people to tell them where they think they are in terms of their goals and everything else. Then you have a future, where you want to go, and then you have a process, which are all the details. So if I give the example, why do McDonald's French fries taste the same everywhere you go? Because they have a process that's so clear that anybody can follow the directions. You got it, right? Well, we don't necessarily have that all of life, but we figure that process out. Well, once you get to that new future, all of a sudden you see new things and you're now frustrated because, wow, we're even better. So it's an improvement process where what they did 2 weeks ago is no longer acceptable because they know they're at a higher, better performing level. And the students that really buy in get that, and that's what propels them their entire life, is that trying to be better tomorrow than you were yesterday.
There are some words that Napoleon Hill used that I think are interesting because they came from him. And even today, you might hear them, but you might not know what they mean. And one of them you mentioned earlier was mastermind.
Well, basically he said because of your environment, your intellectual ability or inability, all of these things, what you can do to overcome that easily is to form an alliance with 3 or 4 or 5 other people that have skills different than you that you meet with on a regular basis. So any great corporation knows that their CFO probably has a different way of thinking and brain than their marketing person does. Doesn't mean both aren't valuable, but if you can find ways to fill in on both of those, then it's great. In a personal example, you might say, okay, hey, I'm good at marketing or communication, but I'm not too good at banking. So, hey, I've got a financial planner, I've got a banker, I've got a really good CPA, I've got a doctor, and you know what? They told me, I got some great advice recently, is when you get about 50, 55, make sure all those people are younger than you so you don't have to replace them when you're 70 or something like that. So I've already done the replacements. So that's, but it's surrounding yourself around people. And any one of those people I can call, and within 2 minutes, I'm getting coherent, valuable advice that is helping me or my business and hopefully keeping us out of trouble and on track.
Well, there are actually self-improvement people now who sell masterminds, where you pay a certain price and you join a mastermind. Some of these self-help gurus now, and they obviously practice what they preach because you often hear them talk about their own masterminds. What do you think of that?
Recently, my wife has decided to order HelloFresh. I don't get it. It's the same ingredients that we already have in our kitchen, but they show up and they give her the recipe and they tell her to do it, and it makes it easy for her, and she loves doing it. So you know what? I shut my mouth, and we have HelloFresh delivered. So I think to me, it's like a HelloFresh, which is a food service where everything's proportioned and they're going to make 2 meals or 3 meals out of it for you. So I think that's, if you can't do it on your own and figure it out, then this is a nice substitute.
You mentioned chief aim before.
Yes, that's how he would describe it. What's your chief aim, your reason for being, or in French, raison d'être? Why are you there? What is it you're trying to do? What you accomplish? And it's fascinating too, because if you look at how that's applied in most businesses, what do they call it? They call it their mission statement or their strategic values or something around this. And what's always fascinating with when I think about those is the acid test for all of that is, can you take the mission statement of one organization and simply move it down the hallway, put it underneath the title of another business, and does it work? And if it does, it probably wasn't a very good mission statement. But I think some of the best mission statements are the ones that are really kind of unique to that organization versus generic, that everybody could use them. So that's a chief aim.
And then Napoleon Hill had 5 categories that he described as where he basically lumped everything within 5 categories. One of them you mentioned was goals, and that's the thing that your students embraced. Attitude, obviously, is another one of those categories. You mentioned environment. Effort is another one of those categories that you can't succeed unless you put forth the effort. And control was another category. Can you explain a little bit about why control was so important?
Well, I should say those 5 categories, he only had the 17 laws of success and 30 causes of failure. And so what is that together? 47 items? I'm like, that's just overwhelming.
Right.
So what I ended up doing for my course, and when I talk about it, I created one more set of content analysis, one more grouping, the 5 buckets. And the positives and negatives within each of them is how I thought about it. So under that control, he had things like, one of my favorite ones, I talk about this, a lack of controlled sexual urge. What the heck is that, and where did it come from? If you know your history, in the late 1800s, there was a concept called sexual transmutation. It wasn't about a sexual disease or anything like that. But what it was in many of the religions were, instead of thinking about sex 24/7, since that's our strongest drive and so much energy comes from that, why don't we peel off some of the energy from that and apply it to something else? Imagine how successful you would be. That was basically the concept. So that's one of them.
Another one was, I think, abstinence from alcohol at that time. Today, if we applied it, could be alcohol and drugs, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people make fun of Donald Trump, but one of the things he's always said in the interviews I've ever heard him do is that he doesn't smoke or drink. And I think he made a comment one time is, can you imagine how crazy he would be if he did do that? I don't know. But I don't know that that's necessarily practical, but I do know a lot of people that have gotten off track when they get addicted to something. If they're so addicted to video games or so addicted to watching TV, they're so addictive to drinking or whatever it's going to be, that usually leads to bad outcomes. And so I think his whole point comes from the moderation concept, is if you do things, have a lot of fun, but don't do them too bad in one area that they become a distraction and get you off track.
What about spending money? That's another area where people can go overboard.
Yeah, and right around the same time, Andrew Carnegie, who, as you may know, and here in Pittsburgh, we know fairly well because he's mostly known for the steel industry, but I don't know if you've ever read any of his backstory or whatever. He had a book called My Story. It was an autobiography.
I actually read it.
So I don't know if you recall, how did he get his start? Do you remember?
As I recall, he was a young guy, and he worked at the Pennsylvania Railroad. That was one of his first jobs.
What was he doing? Do you remember?
No, I don't. Not offhand.
He was at the Telegraph. Before that, what was he doing?
Okay.
Here's a genesis, which I don't know. It was a one sentence in this book, which has stuck with me forever. Apparently, he was living at his uncle's house, and his uncle was in the basement playing a game of darts with the director of the telegraph office at that time, and he said, do you know where I could find a runner to deliver the telegraphs?
I do, yeah.
You remember that part of the story?
I do. Yeah.
And Uncle said, why don't you take Andy? Well, Andy met guys like Pitcairn and some of the other cities that are named around here at that place. That's how he met everybody at the railroads. And when he went to the railroads, he met everybody that he sold steel to eventually. And so it's a fascinating trek. But if you look at all of that now, also have all these libraries that Carnegie started. Some years ago, I had the great pleasure, my wife is a librarian, I was at the Allegheny Regional Branch. At that time, it's since been changed to the Children's Museum. But they let me go in the back, and they had all the stacks there. And I found an old commencement address by Andrew Carnegie giving advice to young men and women, I guess mostly men, who just graduated. And one of the things he talks about was money and what to do of it. And his principle was never let your expenditures exceed your income. And other things like if you save $1,000, any bank in the world will loan you $50,000 because of your discipline and potential. So when I think of all of that, Napoleon Hill's thinking is right around there with that says basically if you spend less than you earn and you're disciplined, he's not talking about being a miser, I don't think. You're in better stead than if you're running up the credit cards and so forth. And many of my students, if they have rich parents, well, congratulations. If not, a lot of them take on $50,000, $100,000 in debt, maybe even more for their education. They've got credit cards and all of that. And we have the modern one fellow whose name is escaping me, the guy that does the Financial Peace University.
Dave Ramsey.
Ramsey, yes. He's basically the most modern day concoction of this whole concept. But it's basically, you pay off your most expensive debts, you consolidate, you save money, whatever. That's an easy principle. It seems like it's easy to not do too. So that's, I think, where he's coming on from some of those.
Well, I remember when I read that book, and he was competitive. First of all, it's an autobiography, so he thought highly of himself, and you
right.
can see that throughout. And one of the things he sort of brags about in his autobiography is when he did work in the Pennsylvania Railroad on payday, all of the guys that he worked with in the office would go off and spend their money. They would have a good time. It was payday, and that was a big day for them. And he was proud of the fact that he took his money home. And he even kind of acknowledged that he got criticized from his coworkers for his habits, but at the same time, he was proud that he saved his money, and in his mind, more than his mind, he actually did put it to good use. He brought it home. He was close to his mother, so he contributed his paycheck to the family till, and he looked at every penny that he earned as a step closer towards becoming the rich person he wanted to be, didn't he?
Right. So he had that goal. It was burning and start making progress, and then he would do his mastermind group with his investments. He always had 51% of whatever company it seemed like, but he'd get other partners to spread the risk around, and they'd make money, and they'd pay it all off, and then he'd go buy another factory and keep going. Now, a lot of people thought he was a bad guy and hated him, and I suppose all of us have two sides that people will love us or hate us for whatever reasons, but I think from what we're talking about today, there's a lot of admiration for some of the discipline he had early on that paid off big for him.
Well, that's true what you said about how he saw himself and how others saw him, because when you read his autobiography, this was after he donated money to create libraries and community centers and all these things for the communities where his employees had worked. And in his book, he was so proud of what he did, and he felt that his employees loved him, and I'm sure a few of them did. But what he never mentioned in his autobiography is all we read in the history books about his employees that weren't such huge fans of his for some of his hardball methods of business. But that was also a sign of the times, too.
Exactly.
So we've talked about a lot of these laws, and we've talked about some of the things that people can do or should do, and some of the things people shouldn't do based on what Napoleon Hill said. You mentioned some stories about how students are applying it in their lives, but what if it's not a student? What if it's a person who's been working a few years? Is it too late for them, or should they be looking at some other self-help people today instead of Napoleon Hill? Or do you think his rules and his laws are timeless?
I think they're timeless. Some of the language might have changed slightly, the definition of some of the words, but I think they're basically timeless. Read whatever you want that you feel is helpful. And is it too old? I don't think so. You've heard of the Colonel Sanders, whatever that story was, 7,000 times, whatever it was, he went to try his recipe, and then somebody finally picked it up, and he was an old guy when that happened. So I don't know. I think at any age, what's fascinating to me is how when I look at my kids, when they were coming through high school, grade school, middle school even, they would show me their homework planners. And I said, "What's this?" And I noticed the fine print on there. It said Covey Franklin or Franklin Covey. Well, you may know the Franklin planning system, big time management system, and Covey is Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And I said, "What is all this?" Well, lo and behold, when I was coming through, we didn't even know what a goal was. Nobody ever talked about that. Here they have planners that they bought for them, and so it's becoming ingrained even younger. So I think it's quickly becoming something more of what successful people learn how to do and keep doing. It's not the mystery it was maybe 20 or 30 years ago. Doesn't mean you can't still talk about it and encourage, in my case, the students or staff, all of that, whoever I'm working with. I think it's still great stuff any age.
Are there any challenges that people face in 2019 that just didn't exist for people back when Napoleon Hill came up with his concepts?
I don't know if they're challenges, but I think with technology and the incessant amount of distractions, the ding, the notifications, the whatever, and I have my staff, and they're really a terrific staff. They're very productive, but I notice they always have an earpiece in. They have to be listening to music all the time. You can't just concentrate and write without listening to music. It's like you're trying to get a good night's sleep, and all of a sudden a dog or something crawls in, decides to kick you every couple minutes. You're not awake enough to kick the dog out of there and get a good night's sleep. You just keep waking up, falling back asleep, and the next morning I feel terrible. I think that is one of our biggest distractions, the phone. It's brought great potential. The internet has basically taken over the world. It's changed so many things about what we're doing. It's brought up so many opportunities. But from a communication standpoint, I find it knowing how to have a conversation with somebody, knowing how to sit one-on-one, know how to turn all of that off, how to be interesting. I hope that's not a dying art. And I see, hey, it's great that the phone is keeping your list, but I don't know that that's as great as a sheet of paper and a notebook somewhere. It could just as be as, if not more effective than the phone. So I think that's a big challenge.
Dr. Lloyd Corder, thank you for joining us today.
Tim, it's been great. Thanks for having me.
To learn more about Napoleon Hill and our guest today, Dr. Lloyd Corder, please see our show notes at shapingopinion.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please let people know by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. You can subscribe to the Shaping Opinion podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. We'd love to hear from you. On Twitter, just tweet to us at Shaping Opinion, or you can get in touch with us through our website, shapingopinion.com. We have a Facebook group that you can join, a Facebook page you can follow, and we're on Instagram at Shaping Opinion. Shaping Opinion is a production of O'Brien Communications. This is where we talk about people, events, and things that have shaped the way we think. Until next time, I'm Tim O'Brien.